All right, let's talk about two players who could be starting for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers next season. There's a chance they both will end up getting some playing time next season. But as of right now, it is the Kyle Trask versus Baker Mayfield debate. Who should be the starter? And let's watch some film of Kyle Trask, and then let's get into sort of the comparison between those two guys and how we feel about them. Who should be the starter? I went back and rewatched some college football tape. If you don't know anything about me, that's reasonable. Hi, my name's Jackson. I have a YouTube channel. I'm a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan, and I really did not like Kyle Trask coming out of the draft. That was something that I was just not a fan of. I did not have him as a top 10 quarterback in that draft class. But going back and just watching some highlights, just watching some tape of him in general, I can see why people liked him, why he was liked enough to be picked 64th overall in that draft class. It's a lot of stuff like this where it's going to be man coverage that the defense is in, and his read is originally going to be towards the offense's left. That's what he's going to do here. So he takes a snap, looks in that direction, and doesn't love what he sees. And this is really where I think the good stuff from Trask comes into play. He is someone who can do a good job, I think, of going through his progressions well. And what people like about him is he is a relatively high IQ player. He knows where to put the football. Watch him eventually get to Kadarius Toney, who was, wide open. And then also watch what Kadarius Toney does after the catch. That's just absurd. He's a very good player. He ends up getting into the end zone for a touchdown on this play. Crazy that he hasn't fully worked out in the NFL because his college tape was insane. But good stuff from Kadarius Toney. But, also good stuff from Kyle Trask. These are the kind of things that if you're someone who likes Kyle Trask, this is what you like about him. And, hey, maybe being someone who can just throw up jump balls to Mike Evans to get him 1,000 yards, not the worst quarterback we've seen in Tampa Bay, certainly. But there's also stuff like this where it's, again, going to be a Kadarius Toney route, interestingly enough. Didn't do that intentionally, but that's what's going to happen. You see Toney's route on the screen. Definitely something that could get open. Watch how Trask is going to take the snap. And I'm actually not going to, a lot of times I like to pause it right when you see how open the receiver is, because I think that does a better job of letting you visualize what the target was. But that's not really what I want to display on this play. I want to talk about the ball itself that Trask is going to throw. I'm just going to be honest, it's not a pretty ball. Look at the air that's under it, it's sort of fluttering there. It's just not something that you love to see. And this is something that with Trask, one of the main reasons I don't love his game is due to his throwing motion, which, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I am a throwing motion guru. There's certainly plenty of people who notice better, can explain this stuff better than I can. But at the same time, with someone like Trask, one of the issues I have with his throwing motion is it's a very long throwing motion, and when he has to shorten it, it results in very inaccurate throws. He can actually throw it a pretty long way and throw it with some velocity when he has a clean pocket and has time, but in the NFL, that very rarely happens, and that's a big concern. Just the arm talent in general is a big knock on Trask, which I think is fair. If you look at his overall Pro Football Focus page, this is coming out of college, because again, guy has 10 snaps in the NFL. I'm not going to pay too much attention to that, but his overall PFF grades and stuff like that at the college level, 2019 and 2018 weren't so good, but 2020 was. He had a above 90 grade, and if you look over all the way towards the right, you see that pretty much every single one of those grades was, among the best in college that year, because those dots, the further towards the right they are, the better it was compared to his college peers. It was very good. So Kyle Trask definitely had the production and had the success at the NFL level, but I should mention there's a lot of players, there's a long list of players who have had plenty of production at the college level, but it does not work at the NFL level. And to me, Trask is one of those players that to me feels like a good college quarterback, but not so much a good NFL quarterback. Although, again, quarterbacks, trying to predict them is definitely difficult. I think a lot of the critiques, I have about Trask, you could have also said against Brock Purdy, and he's worked out pretty well. Doesn't mean Trask is going to be Brock Purdy, but in a perfect situation, that's maybe who he could be. Meanwhile, looking over at Baker Mayfield's Pro Football Focus page, this is in the NFL with Mayfield, you see that weirdly his best two seasons were 2018 and 2020. He had a disappointing 2019 year. That was the Freddie Kitchens season, although it's still not even his worst or second worst season. He was very good in 2020 and, was very good in 2018. You could argue his rookie season was his best year, although PFF would say that 2020 he was significantly better as a passer and, maybe not quite as good of a runner, but still good enough to be the better overall player. But still, he does have multiple good years. Obviously, in 2021, that was the year that he got injured early on, and then it just was not the same. And while some people might have just said it's just the injury, that's the only reason he struggled, that's probably explains some of these struggles, but it does not explain all of these struggles. Mayfield was making poor decisions left and right that year, and maybe there were just throws that he thought he could get away with because he's used to having a more talented arm and then couldn't get away with anymore. Totally reasonable, and it was worth taking a flyer on by Carolina, but things got even worse for Carolina. He was a mess there, and maybe it was just a situation, but I don't know. Sam Darnold came in and played all right, and he's not someone we consider to be a great quarterback or anything like that. Obviously, Mayfield went over to LA and had that incredible win over the Raiders, but as a whole, has had a very weird career. So that's Kyle Trask, that's Baker Mayfield. Who should start? There's definitely several ways they could take this. First, we have to figure out what the Buccaneers are trying to accomplish next year. Because again, who is the better player is a different question than who should start, right? If you have someone like, let's say you feel Trask has more potential, then maybe you should start him, even if you think Mayfield could come in day one and play better. Now, the flip side is if you're trying to compete for a playoff spot or even more than that potentially, the Buccaneers are just a couple years removed from being championship contenders. Maybe they feel like even without Brady, they could compete. I don't feel that way, but maybe they feel that way. If they do feel that way, then okay, I could see some logic in going after keeping the player who you feel like is better right now, which you would assume is Mayfield. I am someone who is not a huge Trask fan, so that's just how I view him. If you like Trask more than I do, you're going to have a different opinion here. But for me, I just don't know how much potential I see in Kyle Trask. Yes, you could look at this and say, well, you spent a second-round pick on him. You have to give him a shot at some point, right? Well, no, that's sunk cost fallacy. It's better to not play a guy who you don't think is going to work out and just acknowledge that you wasted a draft pick than to play him just because you spent the draft pick on him. And this is something that Jason Light, I think to his credit, has done a good job of as GM since being the Buccaneers. Now, it's not his job to decide who's going to be the head coach, but I'm assuming he has a hand in it. And, I remember the Roberto Aguayo situation, spent a second-round pick on Aguayo. I believe that was pick 63. Really, he just got to stop picking at the end of the second round. That's not working out too well for him. But, it might not be picking it towards the end of the second round or any round this upcoming season, but that's a conversation for another day. When he one day drafted Aguayo and it was a disaster after year one, what he said when he got rid of him was, I feel like if we, kept him, we'd just be doubling down on a mistake and making the mistake worse now. Let's just make the move to move on. I could see him doing something similar with Trask if he hasn't been impressed. Go with Baker Mayfield, who I do think has the higher floor, but also might have the higher ceiling as well. So if that's the case, well, then I do think there's a lot of logic in going with Mayfield. Personally, I would just go with Mayfield. And listen, if Mayfield still looks like Carolina Panthers Mayfield, okay, then let's go with Trask. And if Trask sucks too, then you get a good draft pick. Like that's kind of the way that this works. But yeah, those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.